Welcome to Ideamarket Podcast. I'm your host, James Ellis. I'm joined once again by CEO Mike Elias, where we invest your attention as you would your money. We are joined by Alexandros Marinos, the co-founder of betterskeptics.com and also the CEO and founder of Bellina. So thanks very much for joining us. We have a little opening question here, which isn't the simple tell us about yourself. We like to ask it differently. So we would say, if you were to develop a course or a curriculum for other people to become as alike you in your perspective as possible, what would that course look like?
Well, I mean, for one, why would they want to do that themselves? But if they really insisted, yes. I mean, I've been sharing with my team at Bellina, the ones that can take it, sort of, the rationality from AI to zombies stuff, and the ones that are like more, interested in the more compact version, like the scout mindset stuff. So that's kind of a good entry point to being able to think of the physical world sort of with a logical framework, and that doesn't necessarily mean being Spock. If anything, it means recognizing that reality is out there and not in here, right? Like that our representations of that reality are always, through a mirror, and distorted. I'm sure I'm misquoting somebody now. And that we should have the appropriate skepticism, not just to what we see, but also what we think, and then sort of live in that. And then from there, the next thing I'd say is, you don't control your willpower, but you control your feedback loops. So design a feedback loop for yourself that just absolutely forces you to, be who you want to be. So, for me, Bellina was basically that. Like I started a company because I kind of knew an academic mindset would, and a pathway would, I would be very prone to laziness. And I thought, well, if I put my ego and all my my future on the line, that should give me a kick up the ass. And it did. I gotta say. So that any book you can read, all of that stuff is great. But I've recently also come to appreciate embodiment, which is not a word I used to use, but like the way I understand it, and I try to simplify things so I understand them, is no matter how many books you read on riding a bike, right? You're gonna fall, right? And you're gonna and if you know all the tricks and all the procedures and all the checklists for how to like get on and get off, it doesn't matter. So you have to ride bikes to get good at it. So that's not just true for riding a bike or surfing. It's true for thinking and analyzing information and making decisions and all that stuff. So I would encourage people to set up for themselves a feedback loop that sort of forces them to do that, because their brain is an energy saving machine that will want to go in low power mode. That is not justified by our environment, but hey, back in a cave, it made sense.
100%. I like the embodiment aspect of intellectual life is certainly underappreciated, and I kind of sense it making a comeback. It even almost feels as you were saying that, I thought maybe risk management sort of plays a role in giving people an emotional stake in their maybe there's a sort of embodiment aspect to risk management. Maybe that's why it works. Maybe that's what it helps with, returning the logical calculations into the world of consequences. What made you make this shift your orientation toward embodiment? What was the impetus for that?
I think I've always had that frame of mind. I didn't have the words to communicate it, but if you see my Twitter bio, I say practical philosopher, which I made no end of fun of, but like, hey, I don't care. But that's kind of the same thing I'm trying to capture, right? Which is that thinking and having your tobacco pipe next to the fireplace or whatever, and just having deep thoughts, that's not sufficient, or maybe necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient to actually approximate reality, right? So you have to go out there and live it and try out your ideas, and they're going to be wrong. You're going to have to fix them, and you're going to have to go back and just over and over again. That cycle is really something, I don't know. It's an interesting question. Like when I first came in contact with that, I feel I've always known it, but I can't have. So I don't know. It's something that goes far back. I can't trace it fully, but it's just made so much intuitive sense for me. And yeah, I've recently heard that word being used at an episode of the Dark Horse podcast that it just stuck for me. And I was like, yes, I heard the word before. I think Scott Alexander used it somewhere, and it was like some academic weird thing that I couldn't really land. But this time I heard it the second time, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So
cool. Did you use a different term for it, or not really have language for it before that?
I use the words feedback loop a lot. Like you test your beliefs in reality, and I think it's a similar concept, not exactly the same, because it doesn't talk about where the knowledge is situated necessarily, but it leads you to the same result, right? Like that you have to situate your knowledge. Like if you're gonna do that, that it necessitates that you have your body and have your knowledge in an embodied way. At least as I understand the term. I also understand that there's like some very deep philosophical like debates about what that really means. So I'm just using like a layman's understanding of that.
Got it. Cool. I really appreciate the work you've done with the Ivermectin debate, and I think it's particularly interesting for a number of reasons, not the least of which is you're not a medical doctor, and neither are most people. So I'm interested in what kind of ground you might be breaking that will allow other non-medical doctors to imitate this kind of inquiry in technical fields that we don't have any expertise in. And what you're using, it seems like the razor you're using a lot for figuring out truth or whatever without having the technical background is intellectual honesty. Is that about an accurate, is that a fair description of how you're approaching this debate?
It's definitely a good flamethrower, right? Like because you know who to look for and who not to look for. It doesn't mean that all intellectual honest actors will agree with each other or that it's the end all be all. But it helps. It's if somebody is presented with an ability to correct a mistake they made, which is obvious, which is human, and everybody would make it, and they just choose to double down, you can make a few conclusions from that, right? Like just immediately. But that doesn't also mean that they're not right in some things, right? That you should just dismiss them. You should probably not continue talking to them. They're probably going to waste your time. But that doesn't necessarily preclude everything they've ever said from being anything being correct. So when it is for things I truly care about, I will try to parse things, even if they're coming from dubious sources. But I don't, getting into a debate with somebody who's on a mission, like their mental mindset is like, I'm going to convince, I'm going to persuade, or even worse, I'm going to make a point for the audience. I'm going to humiliate this person, right, to make a point, right? That stuff is a waste of time, and in many ways, why we can't have nice things. And I try to spend as little time on that as possible. At the same time, I do believe in tit for tat, especially in social media, right? I don't think that just being nice and peaceful with everybody is the way forward. If you see there's a Nikki Case, I believe, has done a very nice app online called if I'm not mistaken, it's called the Evolution of Trust, that you can sort of play through the game theory and see that like it is effectively our duty to call out bad actors, because if you don't, somebody else will have to, and they'll have to discover it because you didn't do it, right? So it's defending the community to say plainly what is, but at the same time, that's intellectual honesty for me is a good rubric for who to spend time talking to, interacting with, because and of course you weigh you put that frame on their inputs, right? And actually, there's for reasons that we probably shouldn't go into. I know a lot more theology than I'd like. And one very interesting part of how, if you go back into like Jesus, was he a real person and all of that debate, there's a very interesting principle that archaeologists use for analyzing texts, which is, did the person saying this thing, were they embarrassed by what they were saying, right? If somebody says something counter to their agenda, then that is actually a very high quality signal that thing is probably true. If they're saying something that helps their agenda, it might not be true, whatever. But even an intellectually dishonest actor, if they're forced to concede something, and they will concede it, that concession itself is high quality information. So there are ways definitely to extract signal from all sorts of places. One of my big things is that we shouldn't be too picky about the types of evidence that we look into, actually. Like, so, just saying, intellectual honest people, or just saying randomized control trials, or saying, whatever the establishment says, or all of these things can be useful, and all of these things can contradict each other. So we have to make sense with the whole framework.
Yeah, and I like what you said about identifying, was the speaker embarrassed to say what they're saying? There does seem to definitely be, especially in the Twitter age, a anti-correlation between social status and intellectual honesty. They seem to like mutually discourage each other in a lot of cases. And so when there's, that sacrificing of status on the altar of truth, or at least honest opinion, that I'm drawn to that signal too. Who are some of your favorite, Twitter people that do that a lot, or maybe don't get enough credit for being willing to embarrass themselves and things like that? Who are your most embarrassed heroes?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't really have fantastic answers. I'll try to think a little bit more as I talk. But the thing about being willing to do that is you don't end up doing it a lot, because you're the kind of person that would do that, right? Like, you are a self-correcting person, so you will, like, you don't do it continuously, right? Because you actually, first of all, by having to do it, right, and eating humble pie, that is also embodiment, right? That is also like putting deep into your brain that, like, I should be very careful with what I say, because I might have to eat my words.
Yeah.
So you don't expect somebody to, like, every 2 days, like, being like, oh shit, everything I thought was wrong or whatever. Like, that would be weird. But you do get it occasionally, right? So a lot of my introduction to this sort of let's call it bracket has been through the Dark Horse podcast. So, for instance, Brett Weinstein recognized that one of the studies he was using to support ivermectin was of dubious quality. In fact, he went out himself and asked for the data, insisted to get the data, did not get the data, and he said as much, right? And that was, like, a lot of people were probably going to say he's discredited or whatever. Actually, that is the highest signal quality you can get, because he had every reason to obscure that and ignore it and just hope his audience doesn't notice, and no other reason than wanting to be on the up and up than to acknowledge it. And even if that some will say, well, he was forced to, fine, he would acknowledge the things that happened that were public, right? This is the kind of the limited hangout situation, right, where you just, like, acknowledge whatever you have to. It's like, well, something happened, I'm not sure, I'm not going to refer to it, whatever. You don't say, I went out, I didn't get what I wanted, I'm not happy with that, I'm still waiting, but until then, I'm just going to ignore that. Like, you don't add additional embarrassing information on the record.
Yeah. I like that idea that being discredited is a really high signal event these days. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'd like to backtrack just a little bit, because I actually don't mind at all if that you have a lot of theology knowledge. I think that's interesting. And I was just thinking yesterday, I was on a podcast talking about my personal religious journey, and something related to embodiment came up. The idea that knowledge is not something that you can just possess by memorizing, but it's something that you have to live out. And then having been raised agnostic, and then I was atheist, and then, sampled from a bunch of religions and meditative traditions and stuff like that, the Christian notion that the truth is a person, or that Jesus is the truth, just felt like a weird kind of anomaly in the spiritual world. Like, no one else says that. But if the truth is something, if truth is a thing that you know by identification with it and by embodiment of it, there is kind of that precedent that the truth would take form in a person. And I'm just still a little, fascinated by this, because it just kind of, clicked in a new way. So I think, I felt that was, marginally relevant.
Well, yeah, I mean, my trajectory is probably the reverse. Though, I'm much more mellow in my, hardcore, Hitchensian anti-theism than I was back in the day. I will say that one of the, so I have this thing, and I think that's just who I am, but I take ideas really seriously, right? So when I was into, being, a good Christian boy, basically I grew up as a Protestant in Greece, which is like incredibly ridiculously rare. There's like 0.1% of the population, and the rest is like uni-block Orthodox Christians, because the country was formed with population exchange. So they literally said, all the Muslims go over there, all the Christians from over there come over here. So it was like kind of religiously constructed, like to be singular, right? So the minorities are very few. So I grew up as a Protestant, which in the U.S. is like whatever, but there it was like you're like this tiny persecuted minority, which is like really thematic for Christianity, right? Like a lot of the gospel sort of vibe a lot better in that ambience. But I took those ideas very seriously, and I couldn't sort of make them fit. I didn't know anybody who could help me do that, but I kept something. So I think that the jumping off point for me, and it comes back to truth and to Jesus, is there's a verse, and I don't actually know where it is, but Google can help your listeners, saying, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, right? So that for me was like, okay, look, there is nothing. It was actually kind of similar to the current moment, because I felt there was a lot of pushback on finding out what is true, right? Because like you ask too many questions, you're pushing on point you shouldn't be pushing. There was a lot of that sort of coming at me, and I was like, look, this is there, right? It cannot be false for me to seek the truth. If that truth is embarrassing to you, or if your beliefs cannot stand up to that, like this wouldn't be in there if that wasn't, what I'm supposed to be doing, and it feels right, but I also can sort of back my quest, and if it's valid, then I will end up at the right place, and if it's not, then it's already not valid. So what's the point of this conversation? So that was kind of something I go back to often, and I'm like, okay, that's So even in that sort of somewhat insular like an environment that I grew up in, which is not your everyday like enlightened, Unitarian Christianity, but sort of something more fundamentalist. There were these gates that I could find to walk, outside essentially. But yeah, I don't know. It was a fascinating sort of foundation. I used to think I wasted a lot of time just sort of absorbing a lot of that to be able to have that conversation with myself and others. But it comes in handy in weird times.
I have to ask what kind of weird times that stuff comes in handy in. I mean, maybe this is one. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean that's kind of the thing, right? You can exactly. The thing to me is that let me maybe give you another way of that I parse that experience, right? I grew up in a situation where a lot of the authority figures in my life were telling me that one thing was correct and I should go that way and like not to question, et cetera. And I take pride in the fact that I was able to sort of, as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, like up to my early 20s, from the inside of that world, I was able to sort of construct a staircase to get outside, right? It's like growing up in the Truman Show. When there's information control, when there is like all of that stuff, it's a lot of my friends from there are still there because that's the path, right? It's a very high likelihood that you'll end up just doing that as what is the genetic fallacy or whatever, like where a lot of people just end up following their religions, and especially in these kinds of environments. So what I think I concluded definitely early on is that don't trust the authorities, right? Just because everybody around you trust them, and they sound like they know what they're talking about, and they take a lot of like a big patronizing tone, and like they will like throw the book at you and all the emotional manipulation, and they shame you and whatever, still doesn't mean they're right? They have to be able to show receipts or go home. And I think if I have a son now, he's 2 years old, right? And I kind of think about how he'll grow up, because obviously, I mean, unless I don't know something changes, like I'm going to raise him just showing him what I find are true facts, which hopefully are higher quality than what I got. But and that's not to say that I didn't get anything or whatever. I wasn't like repressed. It wasn't like some like completely abusive situation. It was like a very specific group I was into, and not both of my parents were into it. So I just want to make clear. So whatever. But the thing is, like, not having that to escape from, right? You might grow up actually thinking that the authorities know what they're talking about and things are fine. And like if you grow up in a more healthy situation, you don't have that frame, right? So I think it gave me something, which is that everything around you could be saying everything except for the facts basically can be saying that this is right, and it's still not right. And nobody can like convince me otherwise, because I've been there, right? Like, and most of these people who are trying to convince me otherwise don't agree with those people originally. So, somebody has to be right, and it can't be both.
This is
Yeah, you must be very annoying to the powers that be. I mean, not to me, but I feel a lot of kinship with that path. And James, I absolutely want to hear what you want to say.
Well, I was going to say,
wanted to share.
you brought in that quote, the truth will set you free, right? But there's a novelist called David Foster Wallace who finishes up that quote. He says, the truth will set you free, but not until it's finished with you. And that seems to be the big problem, right? Is you get confronted with the truth, and that's very easy to say, like, oh, the truth will set you free. But that doesn't explain to you that horrible process of like, oh man, like, when you come across something and you sort of internally really have to admit, like, yeah, all right, like maybe even years worth of work has just gone down the drain. So that process is the real truth process in either admittance, acceptance, development, or like motivated reasoning, which has come up a lot on these podcasts. Of basically a lot of people are confronted by the truth, and their immediate trajectory is like, right, how is the thing I used to believe still absolutely true? Like, how is this wrong? And that seems to be the big problem.
Yeah, it's like the am I forced to believe this, versus am I allowed to believe this, right? Thing. Even in a lot of people who are sort of rationally oriented, they can sort of construct the world that is like high likelihood true, and then within that there is the things that they would like to be true, and they still like fight the battle, right? Like of okay, well, this isn't exactly disproven, so it may be right? So we could still hold on to that one. Or I'm not forced to believe this other thing, et cetera, et cetera. You can still play that game. But it's another thing I've learned, and I think I've learned that at Balena, is that if you're being dragged in a certain direction, just like at some point, just realize the direction and just go there already. A lot of the time. So for instance, we now make hardware at Balena. Right? Make a little board. We were a software company, so we sold the VCs. Everybody bought into like the software startup that was going to do Internet of Things, but inevitably we understood that we had to actually make some sort of a hardware component, which is not the main part, but like we were forced to. And we were like, maybe we'll do a little bit, or maybe we modify something, et cetera, and like every dilemma we faced was directionally going in a specific direction. And at some point I was like, and this has happened several times, I was like, look guys, it's clear where it's going. We can save ourselves, like 2 years of like being dragged into that direction, but just biting the bullet, doing the thing, getting it over with, rather than just like, I can tell already, right? We're going to have another 5 crises, and there's not going to be a solution, but the solution is going to be that we're going to do the thing. So might as well just go for it, right? So I think with the truth and what it does to you, a lot of the time it's kind of similar, right? You you see which like clusters of belief are getting eaten away. And instead of just saying like, look, this whole thing is just not stable. Like I can't like patch it up. Like everything I do falls apart. Just like dump the whole thing and move forward. So save yourself some years. But a lot of people will salami tactic the whole, even if they are sort of dedicated to the truth, they will still salami tactic, right? It's just like how much can I give up? But they keep doing it. That's the one thing. The other thing is, what's really easy how it's really easy to be kind of like water with the truth, like be like allow it to shape you, is like not to take hardcore positions, right? Like it's not to like set your foot down on something that you don't feel has good solid foundation, right? Because once you do, a lot of other things will activate to and then you're fighting yourself, right? Then that's a whole other battle that you don't want to get into. But like you can be careful in the first place, basically, of what you believe. And I think Paul Graham has that essay called "Keep Your Identity Small," which I think is brilliant. It's like keep your castle, the things that you will defend epistemically, fairly small. I modify that to say, be strategic about your identity, right? You should put things in there that are worth defending, or that you want those internal motivations of yours. We're not robots. We're not, machines. We will do those things, and we should embrace them, but like steer them in the direction that is worth steering, right? Like one of the ideas I often like broadcast is like Occupy Universe. Like we just have to go out there, be among the stars, whatever. Like that I feel is an idea that like I want to stretch myself and figure out if it's right or wrong and build it out, whatever. Like it's Team Human, stuff like that, right? Like things that like, okay, if they're wrong, fine, they're wrong, but like nobody can say like, okay, you were like you did it for yourself or whatever. Like it's ideas that like I don't want to say that we want them to be true, and they're not necessarily true or false. Really, they are about objectives, or they're about goals, terminal goals. So far more debatable. But in general, I think people should be very careful what they put inside the moat or whatever of their ego, because that stuff your programming is to die for those things, right? And maybe you won't drive yourself that far, but that's what as far as your firmware is concerned, losing on any of those things means that you probably will get like stabbed at the next tribal session or something, right? Like so it's a lot of things activate to defend that stuff. So you should be very, very careful what is in that perimeter, and if you can, like push them out yourself early. Like just say like, well, I don't know, maybe that looks taking a far more Bayesian stance to lots of things is far easier to say, yeah, well, the evidence shifted, nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of stuff in there that I liked. The idea of like when you take a solid position, it at the same time kind of makes you vulnerable. There are sort of, do you know the Midwit meme? There's like a dumb person over here, and then yeah, that's my favorite meme ever.
I almost share everything I see with that meme.
Oh yeah, but like I will retweet every Midwit meme that you make, because that is my favorite. There's kind of a Midwit meme aspect to the keep your identity small, don't make conclusive conclusions very often kind of thing. On one side, you have politicians and public figures who abuse the vulnerability of a specific position by refusing to ever take one in order to like be slimy and escape. And then there are the people who, earnestly take one and then get beat up a lot. And then there's a skillful way to keep your belief commitments small and to be, supple and sensitive to new information, while also kind of having a sense of principles or core values or something like that. And so you can see how that one issue can divide people between doing it like well or virtuously, or doing it poorly or viciously. I think that kind of indicates that there's something really important about this concept, and I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, in the Better Skeptics project, we came up across this a lot, right? Because we were analyzing text, and there's qualifiers everywhere, right? Like when people speak, they will qualify things. And there was that. It was like a Rorschach like picture, right? Is it weasel words or is it scientific quantification, like qualifiers and like putting your Bayesian like priors plane, or is it like like you want to say something but you're like just asking questions, like that kind of thing, and it's hard to know. I think that's where intellectual honesty and consistency comes in, and also I think there's a very I might be wrong on this, but like an easy way that just comes to mind of how to figure that out is you ask people to tell you what their summation of the evidence is on something, right? And if they just refuse to say, like, look, it looks 80% X, right? Like, I don't know, there is the 20%, but 80% looks like X. Or if you ask, like, okay, if you were forced to choose today, do you take medication X or not in that situation? What would you do? If they refuse to say, right, they're weasel wording. They're like, because they will have to make a decision, right? Like, and hypotheticals can be used to frame people, right? And I don't want to that I can see why somebody might be a little bit careful with answering those, but there are a lot of those that are not cagey at all, right? So yeah, if people refuse to it's basically like, are they parsing their words so that there's not a statement that can be snipped that can be used against them like a politician, or are they being careful like a scientist, right? And a scientist will say, look, this is what it looks like. If I had to choose right now, I would do that. I'm not certain. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody else. Here's the data. Make up your own mind. But whatever, something like that. The other person would say, like, well, nobody should ever take a look. Like, okay, that's not, it doesn't add up.
Yeah. Have you found a way to make the kind of virtuous qualification sexy? Because it's kind of like on Twitter, any argument or any debate is sort of like, I'm reminded of Gladiator, where if win the crowd and you win your freedom, it's not for you, it's for all the onlookers. It seems like there's an odds between putting intellectual honesty into words in that sort of careful sense and being triumphant looking. Have you felt that at all?
So when you say triumphant, can you give a little bit more on that? I just want to
Sure. Yeah. So if two people are having a debate on Twitter, if I say things are this way, it looks more conclusive, it looks more powerful to the onlookers, to the crowd that I'm trying to win over, than to say the more honest thing, which is it seems this way.
Yeah, for sure.
Have you experienced? Have you resolved this? Do you think about this at all? What's the way to work this? Yeah.
Again, I think it's the Midwit readers that ugly head, where there are some people that if I see somebody being like, for sure this is it, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like on things that are there's clear the division of opinion, and you're not bringing in some weird counterintuitive but amazingly powerful argument on your side. It's you're playing a game, right? But a lot of it does work with a lot of people, clearly, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, I think once you extend the timelines enough, incentives align, and it does, you will say something that you're sure about today, and tomorrow you're gonna be forced to say the opposite, and somebody will find it and will be like, what the hell? And it's not like what you should do at that moment and say I was an idiot, right? Just disclaim that, but people don't. It's like, oh, whatever. You misunderstood me, or what? Yeah, okay, whatever. I'm blind. I can't read. Right. So I think once you stretch out long enough, you just figure out that the strategy of being careful epistemically pays off. I think that's true in general. I think in the moment that we are right now, it's self-evident, because things are changing so fast that I think people who are employing the toolkit of certainty and whatever, they have to wait 2 weeks to look like idiots. It doesn't take 2 years or two decades. sometimes the next day you'll say something and you put it out there, you like make a big stance, like literally the next day, like 2 papers drop, and you're like, holy shit, like that changes everything, right? And this happens every 3 days. So yeah, I think this particular environment is extremely dangerous for people who play with a playbook that we've seen sort of workish before. Now, like those flaws are kind of plain because the data just changes so quickly that yeah, you really have to be careful. And the other thing I look for a lot is consistency, right? Like applying the same standards of evidence across. So, but I don't know, like, yeah, you have that's sort of like expressing certainty. My other favorite is somebody will make a claim, fine, but then they'll say, and that's why you lose the argument. It's like, that's not how it works. You can't do that. Right? But again, it's a certainty, but like on a meta level about the summation of the evidence, right? Or something like that. Like they will just claim victory. Like the second part of the tweet is like claiming victory usually.
100%. Are there, I think I've heard you mention a couple, but I'm interested in whatever heuristics you might have for identifying intellectual honesty.
I mean, definitely, when you're faced with a something that surprises you, or just change your conclusion, or you just make a stupid error. Sometimes, you mistype something. Like this morning, somebody was like, "Hey, you like this thing? It says this stupid thing in there. Like, I can't believe you did that." And I read it, and like I had read it really quickly, and the first half of what I read, like, was what I was endorsing, and I didn't really think it through, and it was just a stupid, like, who cares, right? But they were right. The second half was far more dodgy than the first, right? And I just had skimmed through, and I didn't process it fully, and I was like, good point, retracted, thanks, right? Like it's you make little mistakes all the time. To pretend that you don't is, I don't know, already a red flag. And then when you're caught, to say, good point. And honestly, people think that will make them look far worse than it does. It doesn't make them look bad at all to say, like, hey, sorry, I didn't understand. Good point. And in fact, it was kind of funny because the first reply to them is like, yeah, good luck getting Alex to recognize that. That's why I was like, yeah, good luck, I guess, every day. Like, wait, dude, just give it a shot. But it was that is an easy one, right? And again, in any debate, first of all, the other one actually, which is similar but not exactly the same, in any debate, and really debate is the wrong word here, like sort of conversation, you can construct a frame with the other person you're speaking about, right? Like you can throw them out easy things to accept, and they will accept them. If you say, like, we should do things that have more benefit than harm, whatever, right? Like they'll be like, yeah, that's a good point. Like they will accept things that are easy. Like you just throw like very easy pages. If the other person chooses to fight you on that, you know what you're dealing with, right? Like they're not. It's like, why would you do? Like if we're trying to come to a conclusion, why would you ever take something that is background knowledge, right, and start fighting them? It's like I want you to go to add your own piece on top, and like let's construct a case that we can both agree on. Like not like fight on like is gravity real? Like how are we going to get anywhere? Now we're just like throwing shit at each other. But so there are very easy ways actually to figure that out. And yes, there are sophisticated players, right, that can evade that. But honestly, I haven't seen them, to be completely honest with you. A lot of people will just very, very quickly reveal their true colors by just refusing to play with the rules of conversation, basically.
Yeah, 100%. James, is there something that you were waiting to?
I think maybe just as an overview of Alexandros' sort of process, we should overview the journey of the ivermectin thing that you've been dealing with, and just how that sort of evolved through time, and anything you've sort of discovered from that process of looking into that in relation to, where people's reactions to truth, where truth is sort of hiding. Is there anything you've found from that process of looking into it that surprised you in any sense?
Sure. So I will say again, my entry into that world, and I try to make it clear as many times as I can. Right, I'm not a biologist. I'm not a medical doctor. Yes, I have a PhD, but not in like medical or biology related fields. So I can read a paper, but I can't like get into the details of like, you know, where does the RNA go into the cell or whatever. I'm picking up as I go now, but like that's how I started. So my entry into this stuff is by seeing clear points about intellectual honesty, right? If you ever hear somebody saying ivermectin is a horse dewormer, like that person is not serious, right? Like, no, it's been used billions of times on humans. Is a standard medicine that like everybody like in like the whole middle zone of Africa takes. So unless you're prepared to call those people livestock, shut your mouth. Like you're not, you know, like easy. Like these are so easy. Like almost anyone who pays 3 seconds attention can just see easily, right? But there's a lot more and a lot more subtle, right? People playing with the risk profile, right? Like the risk profile of ivermectin, like just blowing up. Like was one person who had this weird side effect. It's like when billions of people take anything, right? That's the vaccine argument, right? Like give billions of people like a peanut, like or even like water, like some of them will choke. Like, are we gonna like is that how we're gonna play this game, right? And again, that's where I come with the consistency, because it will apply one standard to one thing and another standard to another thing. And I want to start making that point a lot more now. Like if you need a full blown $3 billion randomized control trial to ascertain X, then you should need the same to ascertain Y, right? You should not be sort of willy-nilly. And if that feels too much for you, then it should be too much in both cases, right? Mm-hmm. You can't play like that's a very, very easy. The more sophisticated players, that's the game that they play. They will, for some things, a simple correlation is causation. For other things, you're not serious because you're not following, the full, ceremony of medical research, right? So that's definitely another thing that really kind of gets my goat, if that is an expression that makes sense to anybody. There's been a lot of that, and slowly, and I want to be careful not to sound too paranoid. I started to notice patterns, right? As I've been tracing these things and these specific words and specific like memes and how they spread, you start to come up like with very similar people who seem to be like on the forefront of getting those things out. And then you start to wonder like, okay, what's happening here? Like you make network graphs, you make, different kinds of things. I did a lot of that with Lab Leak, for instance, before the ivermectin saga of, who has published with whom, right? Who depends on whom for reputationally or funding wise or whatever, and then you start to see things, right? Because you see the same names coming up all over the place, and they're like, no, I'm independent. My let's say research body is independent of the other research bodies. Like, yeah, but you both have received multiple $100 million grants from the NIH, so you could claim that doesn't do anything, but you can't say it didn't happen, right? And this is actually another thing that I've seen it in both sides, right? People saying, I'm objective. It's like, to me, that's like a red flag if there ever was one, just directly. Like, you're not objective. Like, I don't care who you are, right? Nobody is, so you're not either. We're all sort of reflecting our own perspective, because reality is there. That's the thing. That's extremely important. It's not like I'm not sort of going into some sort of relativism here, right? Like I'm saying, because like the way I articulated this usually is with analogy of a camera. So if there is a flower that a lot of cameras are taking photos of, we can compare the cameras by comparing their photos with the flower, right? If there is no flower, there is no photo, there's no camera. They're just generating random art at that point, right? Like. And they are the authority in what they generated, because it is coming from them purely, and there's nothing beyond that to talk about. But if we're going to talk about reflecting reality, then your depiction is necessarily going to be a lower grade from that, and that's not a bad thing. Like a map is not the usual. That's not what it's trying to do. But some people sort of see that even as like faulting them in some way. So they will just kind of die on that hill of like, no, I am objective. Like my perception is identical to reality, which is like, again, very easy to say like, okay, that's not somebody who's, I mean, that one I don't attribute to bad faith. A lot of times it's just the absence of sophistication, right? They just haven't thought through a lot of these things. And again, it depends on what you're trying to talk about to see whether you should take that, how seriously you should take that issue. It will be. I do want to codify a little bit some of these sense-making things that I've been sort of doing, I think, somewhat instinctively, and a lot of that has been taken from the kind of the rationality community for sure. Though again, I think my slight difference a lot of the time is that I try to prove them out in reality. So I've filtered and augmented them in some ways, but a lot of the original body of ideas definitely comes from there.
The flower metaphor, the existence of reality out there is why we each have a different subjective viewpoint. Did you come up with that yourself? Because that's awesome. I really like that.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think I did.
I
don't recall hearing it from anywhere else, but I've been struggling with this a lot, right? Because it's like, if you say, the moment you say like our perceptions differ, like you just like count the milliseconds until somebody says it's all in your head, right? And that's not what I'm saying. So I was trying to like how to like articulate that. If I say I have objective reality, that is, Mike makes right? Like that is relativism, right? Because it means that you like copy me, right? Again, but so reality doesn't exist, rather than let's all figure this out, right? So it's this weird thing where like admitting that you don't have full picture is what you do if you believe reality is real, and claiming that you have full picture is what reduces essentially epistemology to power, which is full-blown relativism.
Boom. I think that's the clip I'm going to share when I promote this episode. That was fucking sweet. That like I'm feeling the Midwit meme here again. That you
are in the middle. You are in the middle. That makes me the idiot. No, makes me the idiot though, right?
We're all in the middle. We're all in the middle. What they don't tell you about the Midwit meme is that it's a sine wave, and you're taking little snapshots of it.
That's pretty good, though. That's pretty good.
It's all Midwit memes all the way down.
It really is. I'm 100% convinced of that. The way I'm seeing it here is like there's the sort of Enlightenment view where science means objective reality exists, and we all are kind of compelled by reason to agree with it and agree with each other. And you just present the evidence, and anyone who disagrees is a moron, which is weird because if it was so compelling, then how could they disagree? But like, anyway. And then the reaction to that is the sort of postmodern, everyone just has their own perspective and reality is socially constructed or whatever. And then the sort of synthesis of those things is something like what you're saying with respect to it's by virtue of the fact that there is an objective reality that we have subjective experience and that they're valid and that they're something to contend with in a way that's real. I like that a lot. And it's also we get objections. Ideamarket is building a marketplace that basically lets the public decide using risk management what's worthy of attention, so that the public can manage what gets called public narratives instead of having to rely on institutions to rubber stamp things and deal with all the power plays that are involved in those processes. And one of the objections that we get a lot, particularly from really educated, smart people and economists and stuff like that, is isn't this a Keynesian beauty contest? Kind of implying, won't there be no pattern to what people surface in a market? Because everyone has their own opinions, everyone has their own preferences. And I think the resolution to that is something very much like this flower metaphor. It's the sense that because we live in a shared reality, it is not only safe but imperative to allow subjective competition to happen in an unobstructed way.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how this sort of everything is subjective memeplex is spread, and as you say, right, to people who, I mean, I would say should know better, but definitely have a lot of the background to have all the education, et cetera, which actually drives a lot of my skepticism about that said education. But I think this comes back to the feedback loop ideas and all of those things, right? Like, I think we have a growing class of folks that their entire life has been socially constructed. Like, they've not had a problem that they couldn't argue their way out of, right? Like, everybody they interact with is reflexively putting their own feelings back to them. Like, they care about what they think, right? And therefore they will not sort of hurt their feelings, right? They, like, it's all like, bouncy castle padded situations that you go through. And, it used to be like just for little kids. And then, we took it all the way through. Then they said, well, corporations surely will put a stop to this. And, like, I mean, a little bit, but not a ton. We'll see where we hit the wall with this. But, you can think of people whose entire, like, if you are, the way I describe that is like, if you have a block of wood, right, and you're doing woodworking, right, and you want to make it flat because you want to make a thing, like, you can't argue it into being flat. Like, no matter how many tears you cry on that block of wood, it's still not going to be flat. You can be passive aggressive with it, you can blame it, you can do all sorts of things. It will just absolutely not give a hoot. It will just stay crooked, right? Because you didn't make it flat. If you do the things that make it flat, it will become flat, whether you care about it or not, right? That's a feedback loop, right? That's you and reality interacting in a way that doesn't care about your feelings, basically, right? It doesn't, your feelings should care about reality, not the other way around. But since we, this kind of like suffering has been, like, any sort of negative feedback has been, like, demonized, and we, like, are basically editing it out of our lives. I construct some sort of understanding of why somebody, like, it used to baffle me entirely. Like, I can't possibly imagine why somebody would think that, right? But then if you think about it, right, you grow up, you're pretty well off, you go to a nice school, and you go to, like, a high level, like, Ivy League, whatever, then you're shepherded into, like, your job at the New York Times or McKinsey or whatever. And at no point in that, like, path, you played the game fine, you've done what you should do, but, like, everybody's, like, always being super nice to you, and if something goes wrong, they'll, like, they'll like, say it very kindly, and if you get in trouble, they'll look the other way, whatever. It's like, how would they what opportunities do they have to actually, bash their heads into a wall in a good way, right? Like, to just humble themselves, like, very few. So that's what you get. Like, that's the world we designed, and that's the results we get out of that.
What opportunities have you had to humble yourself?
I mean, starting a company is 1,000 times this, right? Like, to me, that was, like, part of that whole thing, because when you ask people to give you their money to buy a product, you are a hunter-gatherer, right? Like, there's no fence between you and their anger if something breaks. Their skin in the game is different than your skin in the game. Like, they don't, like, they want your stuff to work, and you want your stuff to work, but they don't care about your feelings, right? That's like, you are, like, not number 16 on the list, and you're gonna hear it. So, or you're just gonna get ignored. Like, nobody is like, yeah, it's good. They'll say the nice things, right? A good friend of mine has this book out called The Mom Test, where basically the whole point is, like, don't ask your mom if she thinks your startup idea is good, and if you do, don't say, do you like my idea? Because she's gonna say yes. But the point is, like, are people gonna give you money for it? Are people gonna actually not, like, report that they would give you money, but actually give you money, right? Like, and that there's a lot of that, like, with investors, with employees, with all sorts of things, and then you try things in reality. You're like, okay, we'll build this way, and it will work. It'll take this long, whatever. you're constantly doing that, right? Like then that's what I love. And honestly, this is kind of why I've been doing this for about a decade now. So and the way we work internally at Balena is like we have a lot of that kind of dojo where we just jump in and we talk about problems like as much as possible. Of course, there's always that subtle power dynamic, but as much as possible as equals. Like, and people correct me all the time, and they're encouraged to do so. And because I want to be right. I don't want to be like praised. I want to actually be correct because it matters, right? It matters for me and it matters for everybody, and everybody's a shareholder, and that's also for similar reasons. But like, we are doing everything we can so that we look at reality as closely as we can. We never can have a full accounting, of course, and sort of try to manipulate it, which is the important part, right? You can look at reality and like accept that is like everything is going to be amazing or everything is going to be terrible, but like that middle ground where you're like, I could do something and what I do matters, and like actually testing yourself against it, that can really suck. But I think it's that when it's done with you thing, right? Like it doesn't really suck once you know what you're in for. But if you've not been sort of fed that sort of worldview or somehow eased into it, it can be a shock. Yeah.
That idea of the entrepreneur being in the wilderness, being the hunter-gatherer, and just having no barrier between oneself and the feedback and oneself and reality. I think that seems to connect with what you were saying about the people who just kind of get on the conveyor belt into McKinsey or some giant institution, that they have this cushion of institutionalness, and you can wear the name like a 1,000-foot blanket, and then nothing can really impact it. And there's this sort of detachment from consequences. And I don't think that was intentional in institution building, but it's just kind of what ends up happening, that, responsibility and consequences get diffused across a whole organization, and many hands make light work. And you just feel sort of, you don't feel the reality of it. Like if you start a lemonade stand and someone drinks your lemonade and dies, like that's going to change your life. But if you're the CEO of Walmart and someone drinks Walmart's lemonade and dies, it's not even going to make it to your desk. Like there's this diffusion of responsibility, and it makes me hopeful that the internet and allowing people to start businesses, I don't want to say more easily, but more easily, and have control over their own, productive income and independence more easily. There might be something here in the future of education that, it's less about prestige and credentials and institutional paths, and more about that kind of responsibility that gets built up by having high stakes all the time, by having a quick feedback loop between action and consequences. And I think entrepreneurship is awesome for that. I like the way you described that. Yeah, that's just cool. And it has me thinking about that.
So I think it definitely resonates as well. Like this is something I think about a lot as we structure Balena internally, right? Like our team, because essentially what happens is a constant editing, right, of negative potential for negative experiences gets edited out, and before you know it, you just have again the bouncy castle we created, and the bouncy castle is a problem because everybody can do their job perfectly, and the system does something completely idiotic. Right. And you're like, how did that happen? It's like, well, systemic X, right? Okay, great. But whose fault is it? Like nobody. Okay. That's not only a problem because you can't attribute the problem, but also like nobody gets that feedback, right? Like, so nobody's going to want to fix it. So as we structure Balena, my it's not exactly that like we're going to end up with like 100 little businesses or something like that, but it should be functionally like there should be a path to feedback for everybody. Like that's kind of, we have this like archetype of the product builder at Balena, and we try to modify our software architecture to enable that on the product level and on the individual level of everybody builds their product, right? And their product is their thing, and it's defined. It's like something specific. It's not like you have a fractional product that you're building, like a small fraction of a big company or something. No, it's like you're building this you are a platform for the rest of the team, right? They rely on you for this component, which it like makes sense. Sort of the boundaries make sense. Power and responsibility basically should. If there's one rule about organizational design that I keep coming back to, is like power and responsibility. The Spider-Man rule, I guess, right? Power and responsibility should match. If you have people with responsibility and no power, or power and no responsibility, all we can talk until the cows come home about how many issues stem from exactly that one rule. So if you start from that rule and start designing your organization, you're going to see very interesting things. So, for instance, just an example, we noticed that a lot of the team would, because we try not to structure ourselves completely in the classical way, but we do make mistakes over time, and we try to course correct. So at some point there was like quite a division between the engineering and like product building side, and then more the financial and like dealing with investors and like the board and all that stuff. And we sensed like some sort of bitterness showing up on both sides, because the one side did not know what we were dealing with on the other side, right? What pushback we were getting and what we needed to present. And we just kept getting these requests that were like kind of disruptive, and then like, what's the deal? And then the other side feels like they're not appreciated. It's like, dude, we are like fighting the battle of the century here on the board. Like, there's like all these big issues that like if we let them slide through, like you guys are going to be in trouble. Like, but but you don't know what we're defending you from, right? Because you don't know the conversation. So however much like you like the person and you like abstractly like trust them, you don't realize what it is that is happening and why it is that they're asking what they're asking for. So that's, I think, the point at which we really realized that we needed to be a lot more intentional about matching those things up, because the moment you allow them to sort of start to separate, you even if starting with the best intents and the best kind of people, you will get that sort of siloization and all the bad things, and but also emotionally, like you get a cynicism ultimately, because you can't construct a model of what's happening and why, right? So you just end up with like a basic conspiracy theory, like that's the ultimate bottom line of making a theory of like there's bad people out there and everything that happens is like to make me miserable or whatever, like some very basic thing that explains everything because it explains nothing. But people will intuitively come to that if they don't have enough information to constrain that theory out of their mind. So the less information you share, the more likely people are to become cynical. And I mean, I don't have the data on this, but it's also not like super doubted that like the larger the organization is, the less productive they are per employee, right?
Yeah, that would certainly make sense. There are a lot of things I want to ask, but I want to give.
You were trying to go or
No, not at all. I had nothing planned. I'm just taking a strategic pause because there's about 5 different things I'd like to mention, but I also want to give James the chance to speak.
I was just going to venture into the long short question. So if you've still got something on the I mean, because
let's do this
because it's clear there's we've sort of focused on the the truth angle, the truth direction here, but we have a couple of questions as Ideamarket sort of focused on markets, ideas. Basically, the first one would be, what is an idea or something going on at the moment or recently, or you think might be coming about, that you are short on? Something that maybe everyone else is like, yeah, this is amazing, this is the dream, this is going to be great, and you've been thinking, no, I'm short on this. This isn't going to go how you guys think it is.
I'm going to say antinatalism. Is that big now? Does that count as big?
I'd say it's big. I'd say it's big.
I'm really sure. I think there's this idea that we've gotten into ourselves that we have to live within our means as a planet, as a civilization, as a whatever. And it's kind of prudent, right? If you think of like a zero-sum situation, like, oh, we should all share within that, the wealth that there is, and we shouldn't be selfish and claiming more resources than we are morally entitled to, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, like, that's all great, except this is like no species has ever done that and lived. Like it's pretty serious. Like biologically, this is extremely implausible that we'll be able to pull that off. Like it's not known to happen, right? Like you either grow or you die, as far as I can tell. So I take that extremely seriously, and again, it seems to me like another thing where our instincts are taking us one way, and we've educated ourselves out of it in ways that are like really pernicious. But to me, like if we are running out of resources on Earth, good, there's other planets. We need to go there. There, whatever, like mine asteroids. But actually, even like Rocco had this great blog post about how the Earth can support like a few trillion people easily. Like what's the boundary? Like because it's a meme, right? It's like, oh, we don't have enough energy. It's like, have you seen the sun? Have you any idea how much it like sends down like daily? Like, are you serious? Energy? We're gonna run out of water? Have you been in the sea? Do you know what we can do with energy and water? Like even salt water, we can make it into drinkable water. Do you know what we can farm with drinkable, like infinite drinkable water? Like it's it doesn't end. So we just have this weird, like we have to sustain the Earth like in like this, also like this kind of like stasis, and it's like again never happened. Like the Earth was never in stasis. Like to try to hold the Earth in stasis is to go against what the Earth wants to do. So we just, instead of just accepting that we are a species in this game and we will do what we will do, and we should sort of maybe try to do that as according to our principles as we can, but going out there is like not like that's as natural as anything, right? Like the exploration instinct and to find new lands. I mean, the fact that people are shaming billionaires for like not spending their money on like hookers and cocaine or whatever, but like rockets, it's just like melts my brain. Like I can't fully process it. But like it's all coming down from that one thing, which is like we have problems down here on Earth and we have to live within our means, et cetera, et cetera. It's like we are humans. We are general intelligences. We can invent shit. Like do it. Like stop like locking yourself into that tiny thing as if like new technology has never been invented before. It's like yeah, I don't know. You see by my ranting that like it really touches deeply with like this thing of like I'm not going to have children because the Earth is just I have real problems with it.
So antinatalism is like the Midwit meme again. It's like have babies and then a huge paragraph and then just have babies.
Have babies.
It's pretty much how I feel.
Early enough.
Yeah, what is it? Be fruitful, and I'm combining the Bible verse with the Spock thing. Go forth and prosper. Be fruitful and prosper. Be fruitful and multiply. There it is.
That's right. That's right. Go forth and multiply.
Yeah, there we go. That's it exactly.
Do you think that in the end, then, as you say, we're educating ourselves out of instincts? I mean, we're seeing this all over the place with people like pushing the agenda of like, as you say, like, oh, I want to have kids, but it's bad for the environment, bad for the planet. Do you think ultimately at a certain, maybe even at a certain age, instincts just will always win?
Not always. I think there's to go to slightly more controversial sources. Michael Malice has this thing where like you can train a smart dog better than you can train a dumb dog, or something like that. Education seems to be able to beat, and then it's not just the education. Right? You commit yourself to it. You go out publicly, you tweet about it, whatever. People know you for it, and then you just. That's another Yukowski thing, actually. That we're not fitness maximizers. We're adaptation executors, right? Like we run the program we run, which tends to be fitness maximizing, but we are not ourselves intentionally maximizing fitness. So if the signaling instinct takes over from the reproduction instinct, that could go your whole life, and that there's nothing to stop it. Like there's not going to be like Darwin's hand coming down to like force you to do something or whatever. He might give you an award, but he's not going to stop you from doing something completely silly. Sadly, I don't.
So there might be, antinatalism might fail, but we might end up in like idiocracy. So the smart people are all well trained in the signaling of like sustainability, and basically all it means is not to be around the bush. My own opinion, that the not smart people just end up breeding loads.
And that might improve over what we've got going on right now, actually.
Well, if our smart people allow themselves to fall into that hole, the question is how smart are they? And maybe we do need something that is not considered smart today to breathe a little bit to get out of that. Maybe our smart people today grew up in we're selected in an environment where trusting the authorities was a good idea, and we need a little bit of the other ingredient to come into the fore, where it's like I'll hear you out because you're an authority, but you still have to make your case. And if you don't make your case, you don't make your case, and we're gonna have to live with that. It's not my fault you're incompetent, but if you're incompetent, you're incompetent. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I think fitness is sometimes a lot smarter than we give it credit for. Yeah. So honestly, I couldn't tell, but I also think that we're at the cusp of gene editing like we've never seen before. So the traditional sort of intelligence increase and all of that stuff, I think, is not relevant in the timelines we're playing in right now. Like our power to modify ourselves is growing far faster than our the very low grade eugenics experiment that we're like that is any species. So I think that it gets dominated by the rise in our capacity to read write our own genetic code.
So on the flip side, would that be the thing you'd say you're long on, is gene editing, or is there something else out there at the moment that you think needs hype?
I'd say I'm long the paradigm of the commercial charity, let's call it, right? Like the paradigm of starting a company that does a good thing in the world and makes money while doing it. So Elon Musk, basically, right? Like he could have started a nonprofit that would have tried to fight climate change or something, right? And he would not have made an inch the 1% of the difference he has made by starting a company that is held, again, feedback loops all the way, right? Like is held to a standard of building a great product and therefore has to do a really good job of it, right? They've put their necks and their names on the line in a way that in the charity, everybody will just pat you on the back and say like, oh, you're such a good person, you're just working on this thing. Oh my God, you get invited to cocktail parties. But the motivation to actually accomplish the goal is low. I think that the union of the ability to the increase in the potential of the individual, right, or a small team is, the fact that a private company sent, something to orbit, and then a few companies did it, right? Like it's not just SpaceX right now. There's Rocket Lab. There's Blue Origin, I guess. There's a few others. I mean, Blue Origin hasn't really gone to orbit yet.
They're focusing on that lawsuit.
Actually. Yeah, sure. I mean, everybody has to build their core skill, I guess. Virgin did it recently, though, and there's a bunch of others. Relativity Space is one that I'm looking at very much, that are just doing things that used to be a state actor thing, right? Like you need to be a state actor to do that, and now it's like, hey, whatever, we're just going to get in Relativity Space. Those guys are insane, right? Like they 3D print rockets. Like what? You should see that video. Seriously, if your audience hasn't, just watch the video from Bloomberg on these guys, and just your mind melts, right? But that capability that grows into the individual and the small team, combined with the ability to proof of concept, I would say, from Tesla and SpaceX and a lot of the other things that Elon is doing himself, which I really would like us not to be dependent on a single human, but hey, here we are. I'd love to see that path followed by others, and I think it's a thing that's getting more and more accepted, right? Instead of McKinsey do a startup, I think a lot of people are being drawn to that. I think the startup game itself has its own pitfalls right now, but again, I think that's a step in the process of realizing truly what's possible. And we keep adding capabilities to the individual. So as worried as I am that some nitwit is going to take the next virus and modify it in their basement, the upshot of that is that the capabilities of the individual are becoming ever greater, and combined with the fact that we now know that you can make a real dent on matters of importance by starting a actual company. I think that is kind of derided a lot as like a Silicon Valley sort of naivete or whatever. And I don't think the case has been made convincingly that is. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. So that's what I'd love. I'd love to see just people trying stuff and just going out there and building crazy shit and failing and succeeding and iterating and just keep pushing the boundaries. Because if we expect our institutions to do that, good luck. It's not. It's just like that.
Yeah,
gonna happen.
Yeah, Elon built a hell of a lemonade stand. That's I love the point that it's basically one. Yeah, yeah. One guy as a state actor. I mean, it's not just him, but I mean, he probably could fund it with his own net worth. But I mean, the leverage that individuals can accrue is just mind-boggling, and it raises the stakes so high in both directions that someone probably could engineer a virus in their basement or worse, and at the same time, well, I was trying to escape this, but I can't really. I'm kind of
go for it.
Okay. So I was going through a pretty depressed period of my life, maybe six years ago, and as kind of a coping thing, I was a big Reddit user, and what I liked to do is find things that are taboo and obviously true, and just build a really ironclad case for it and make a big comment and go boom and just paste it into Reddit where it'd be super visible and upset a bunch of people, but convert a bunch of people. And one of the things I did this for was UFOs. There are, just the history of the study of the phenomenon and how many, generals and astronauts and presidents and stuff like that have, in one way or another, validated the existence of UFOs as physical objects, and like the radar records and all that stuff and the patents owned by the US Navy. Like it's a pretty weird spectrum of information that's out there. And it's just so, it's so substantial. And I've heard a lot of stories, some of which are from people that I know personally, of people who have invented crazy things that then get they get silenced about. They invent rockets that can go the speed of light or whatever. They invent craft that distort gravity and don't even, bother to deal with it at all. And we can go to the moon and Jupiter like it's going to McDonald's. And there's just like this whole separate kind of aspect of technology that makes the technology that we deal with in even like political and nation state level affairs look completely fake. And the level of leverage that accrues to the individual now is nothing compared to the leverage an individual will have when and if that stuff becomes doable in public and at scale. And I don't know if you have particular. I'm definitely interested in your thoughts on that, like the plausibility of any of those things or anything that you might have heard that's similar or contrary. But it seems pretty reasonable to me, at least, considering accepted human flight was invented in 1903, and just like 50 or 60 years later, you have the SR-71, and then what? We just plateau right there and never develop anything?
Yeah.
Like that was some pretty ridiculous growth. And, we're still, Elon Musk even, is still just building missiles that point up.
Yeah.
Like it's very sort of primitive. It's von Brownian. It's ape space stuff. But yeah, like I'm interested in, whatever reactions all that may have caused in you.
Yeah. So I got a few. So, I mean, on the one hand, I haven't dug into this whole thing at all, including the latest sort of stuff that came out that, like, I've been sort of preoccupied with other things, as you may have been aware of, and I just, like, my mind space has just not gone there ever since, like, I don't know, I was like a teenager reading the local, like, Greek Third Eye conspiracy magazine. Since then, I don't think I've delved into, like, UFO-ology. But so I will say one thing that sounds to me obviously true, which is that the capabilities that are out there are ridiculous, and it's kind of obviously weirdly true. Like that, there's so much potential in the technology space. I've seen that with my own eyes. Like what I can do and what I've seen others do that is just not considered doable until it's done, and then it's like, oh, okay, sure, whatever, or like how ideas very often die on the path to realization, not on the prototype. So you can get the prototype and then somehow, sometimes for legitimate reasons, right? Like you can't mass produce it, you can't whatever, so it fails there, or it gets like scuttled, or whatever interests. A very interesting story here, which will take us back to the original subject a little bit, but it's fascinating on its own right. If you hear Robert Malone's story of how the invention of the kind of the concept of the mRNA vaccine, not the current vaccines, the concept of the vaccine, just to be clear, when.
Thank you for slowing way down for everyone on that.
Yes, please.
That's a necessary step. Yeah.
People need to understand. Like it's not nobody's. At least the man himself does not claim to have invented these current vaccines. Like it's like there is the Kitty Hawk, and then there's the 747. And just because the Wright brothers did not invent the 747 does not mean they did not invent the airplane, right? But anyway, so his story, if you hear it, he actually said it on a podcast that I kind of listened to intently, and I actually wrote down a part of it in the thread. But the first part of that is the story of the invention. It's fascinating, right? Because the moment he kind of like the way he describes it is like he had like a very virtuous moment of being like right in the middle of all the right technologies, though nobody knew that they were the right technologies and that they fit. And so basically, wherever he looked, he would find another piece and he would throw it at the thing and it would fit. Like he just made rapid progress that wasn't supposed to be possible. But the moment that it became clear that his thing worked, like everybody just jumped at it to like claim credit and sort of in the process discredit him for it. And, it was suddenly wasn't his idea. And, all of these things, a lot of drama happened, which actually ended up giving him, by his record, like post-traumatic stress disorder. And because the lawyers come in, you can't talk to this person about that, and the other lawyers are threatening you. Like you're just a scientist, right? Like what you want is to be in the lab and invent shit, and like so all of a sudden you're like going meeting to meeting, getting threatened, and like just all this crazy shit thrown at you for having done something good, right? Which is like just absolutely like it must like really hurt. But that pattern is fascinating, right? Because this is not how you expect it to go, right? When you invent something new and just clearly powerful, right? You don't expect it to A, cause everybody to hate you, and B, what actually ended up happening, by his recollection, but I also have checked out a lot of that, is that Merck bought the patents. They couldn't continue it because he wasn't part of the game. And if you know with biology, this is a common story where like what you publish and the embodied details of like exactly how you do it are like slightly different because you can't really capture everything. So they just couldn't make the experiments work, and they just shelved it. But they hunted anybody who tried to do anything with it, right? So then for effectively until not too long ago, like in I think in this decade, if not the previous one, in the 2010s, if not in the 2000s, is when those patents ultimately expired and a lot of the research was allowed to continue. So that's an example that comes to mind about something that was invented that was like completely ahead of its time, and then it just got caught in the cogs in a way that like delayed it by like easily, let's say from 89 to 2019 is what? 11,
like 30 years.
30 years, like easily 3 decades just gone for a technology that we could have now, like, some people are shouting at their monitors, like, if it could be delayed for another 30 years, that would be great. But that's besides the point. So, like, at the same time, though, that also tells me about how it sadly is possible that we could have gone to the SR-71 and then nothing, right? Because we basically had, in my mind, the way I process this, and I might be completely wrong, like the way institutional power has worked and sort of the filtering that it does to people. We had the Second World War generation that felt the feedback loop, like, directly, and maybe they're like direct instructees. But since, like, at some point physics decided to do like string theory or whatever, and it's like, a lot of great minds went into, holes that were ultimately, a lot of, self-pleasuring and very little, result. So I sadly, I can imagine why that would happen in ways that are like guilty, but at the same time, I also know that there's a lot of room for creativity that, like, I've conferred myself, and I also know that technology does get classified that was amazing, and it just gets retroactively, like, marked as like ITAR or whatever, and then you either go to some remote village that they tell you to go to work on it, or you can't work on it anymore. So all of these things can happen. On the UFO thing, like, what would be really cool? I was thinking about it as you were saying it. It would be great. So we did the Better Skeptics challenge, right, where we put like some material to a real, like, hardcore sort of stress test. And the next time we want to do something where we have, like, ideally dueling materials, right? So you have like a couple of texts maybe from like the opposing perspective, and just expose them to like the acid test of reality. So if you're up for it, we could try to find good material on both ends. Like, I haven't dug into that, but it is interesting, and it's a sort of thing where the signal and the noise can get intertwined in very interesting ways. And I'd be fascinated to try to find some good pro and con materials that are like well encapsulating their respective positions, which I can imagine might exist, and I can imagine you might even know what they are, and to sort of expose them to the harsh test of the internet and see what happens. Yeah, I'm genuinely curious. Honestly, I before the recent wave, I would have completely dismissed it. I gotta say, even now, like, I'm like, I have a lot of other things that like come in conflict with it, but I'm also super naive to it, so I have no. My opinion is both weak and weakly held in this regard. It's like I'm mostly agnostic. Like, I don't. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, I would love to participate in that. I would love to contribute. That would be super awesome. The UFO thing is interesting, not only for like the phenomenology of it, but the implications for like the climate crisis and energy stuff and all the things that you were saying earlier. Like, we do not have a resource deficiency, and if we have the ability to mine asteroids already, like, just personally, then we have even less of a resource constraint, and that would be a weird universe to suddenly be living in. I thank you for bringing up Better Skeptics too, because I'm obviously fascinated with epistemology experiments, particularly using the internet. I would love to hear more about that, what your vision is, and what other kinds of frameworks you're going to play with, and just all that stuff.
Yeah. So Better Skeptics, we honestly, it was fascinating to me because I think I said before we started, we have no idea where this is going to end up, and truly we had no idea where it was going to end up, like what happened with it. And honestly, it was really, I kind of, what people may have misunderstood about it is that it truly was, the audience was me, right? On that challenge. I wanted to know for myself if the material was good or not. So everybody else who gets value out of that is great. I'm happy, but like, a lot of people are like, oh, you're just propagandizing for the, yeah, sure. I'm literally funding people to like create like the most like lethal memes that will be mined against the people that I actually consider to be high quality people, because I am propagandizing. you got it exactly correct. No, what they're saying is pretty fucking terrible, and I both find it plausible and don't want it to be true. So I want to know what the other side is. And honestly, what came out of that was like, yes, there were errors as you would expect, fewer than I expected, for 11 hours of spoken word on high, on very low confidence, let's say, issues, and people stuck their necks out, right? Like, this wasn't like some sort of like talking about like, oh, well, maybe possibly, like they like went all out, right? Like, and the fact that we didn't find like, I don't know, a wealth of like, it's either because the submissions weren't very good or or there wasn't that much to find. I think it's a little bit of both. A lot of people criticize the process, which I find very humorous, because two of the referees have come out. One we knew, but he was also a very good friend of mine, so I knew he wouldn't dismiss do a bad job just because he didn't like Brett, but he did not like Brett. So I forgot if anybody knows who that is. He's like an old school rationalist. The other one came out afterwards and said, yeah, I think it's irresponsible what they did, whatever, which we did not know, but we did not also filter for, right? So we didn't ask like, what do you think about Brett or whatever. We just said, you seem to be a smart person. You seem, you want to do this, let's do this, right? And the third one was recommended by someone who ended up having like ridiculous bias, right? But he himself was far more measured. So we had three referees essentially that were all like dubiously sourced, let's call it, right? Like definitely not, like they could be accused of the opposite, but not of the case that they were like in favor or wanted to like to come clean. And then a lot of it comes down to the mechanism, right? We said falsification is the standard. We're not going to go for like fact checkers. We're not going to be like, we're not going to validate things. We're going to invalidate things, right? Which is like a well understood, like I didn't invent, Popper. People know who that is. And I said the standard is that, and we added. I did it like cautiously and as a concession essentially to say like, okay, if you show that there's like a high probability of being false, even if it's not like, if you don't prove it's false, if you don't truly falsify, we're going to count that too. And people are like, well, but you didn't like give enough like weight to like the probability of stuff. It's like, no, that's the point. Like, if you show me a bad piece of content, I can falsify it all day long with like hard falsification. I can live up to that standard that I set for everybody else, or at least I think so. If somebody can set up that process, I'll be happy to oblige. So at that point, like, we've got the objective-ish standard of falsification. We've got referees that are like not positively inclined, or at least are not sourced in a way that would make them positively inclined. In fact, if anything, the opposite. And the result is that we didn't find very much to correct. And I think we found less than we should have, really, because the submissions could have been higher quality, but they focused on details that were actually easily discredited, right? So my standard was like, we should find at least 10 things. And we found like 3, and we salvaged another 2 that didn't actually pass what we thought they could be like steel-manned into something that would pass. So we put those there too. So that whole process to me was incredible, because it showed that you can make a process that, even with unreliable, this was the spec that we had set out for ourselves, right? With an unreliable with unreliable inputs, and a fairly clean process, you can end up with collective intelligence, like something better than the inputs. Nothing is truth, nothing is like objectivity. We're not backing down on those claims, but something that is more informative than the inputs themselves, right? And definitely more distilled. So to me, we like that got accomplished really more than I expected to see it accomplished. So that format is something we want to try more of. We've got some modifications, of course, like everything. This is the first sort of version. There's definitely things we could have done better. But I'm really amazed that it held at the level that it did hold, and that the result. Yeah, I would I can stand behind, right? Because there was also the case that like if something went wrong, it could validate a lot of things, or it could make a lot of claims that I would be like, yeah, well, that's what the process says, but I disagree with it. And honestly, what came out is pretty convincing to me. Like, I may have like very minor differences, but like it's not, of course, like nobody agrees with anybody. Like, and that is like the voice of a collective right now. It's not nobody holds what the report says. Nobody agrees with 100%. So I am also not in 100% agreement with it, but it's like as close as it could possibly get, like to doing that. So that was honestly, I think for the first round of that format, it went great. We want to do more of that. And that's why we're kind of looking for the next topic. We're thinking like if it's going to be in the pandemic space, we're thinking maybe long COVID or masks or lockdowns. There's like so many issues where it's like, there's like a lot of strong sort of, push from both sides. Or something like what you're describing, which is sort of very interesting in that, again, you have a lot of uncertainty, right? And a lot of strong opinions. And a lot of errors that are being made either on purpose or by accident, right? It doesn't really matter. Ultimately, I'm on record as saying like I prefer the malicious to the incompetent, because at least the malicious want to keep us alive to rule us. The incompetent might actually destroy us. So I don't know why, but like that's the sort of thing that it would be great to run again. And then other things, I think my mind goes a lot to the sort of intellectual Turing test. I don't know if ideological Turing test style things, like get people to articulate the opposing ideas in a way that their opponents would agree is a fair articulation. I think there's something there. And my mind also goes to another way to circumvent argumentation, which is predictions, right? You can have your own way of thinking about things, and you don't have to justify it. You don't have to explain. You don't have to convince anybody about why and how you think. All you have to do is say, I think X will happen or will not happen. And keeping track of that, again, can add that layer of consistency across time, which is really the only thing we have at this point, right? Like there's no, with everybody having an opinion, the only thing you have is the motion parallax of time, right? Like you can watch somebody over time to see, how they process. And then that can be, I think, an interesting way. Like we have pundits now, but nobody tracks them, right? So what's the point of having them go on TV every night? If we did that, I think we may be able to build something a lot more coherent as an elite, but an elite that has to prove their worth, all the time.
Yeah, and that sounds actually.
Ideas, but, I honestly, a lot of that is implementation, and also I would just love to see others. I mean, you guys seem to be working on something that is like broadly in the sense-making space in a way, and I'm generally a big supporter of people trying stuff because something has to happen. Like we have to figure out a way. The core premise is that what we know doesn't work. What we're trying to do isn't working. It's like really underpowered. So we got to find something else, and we'll find out.
Yeah, I'd say the idea of an elite that has to continue to prove its worth is pretty much the ideal output for what we're trying to build in that respect as well. The main thing that we started with is all the information in the world is free, which means all the best information in the world is free and available, but we don't really have mechanisms for wanting it really bad. A few pockets of nerds and autodidacts like go and do the research on their thing, and they become, the completely invisible experts on the X, Y, or Z. But there's no way to farm that best knowledge in the world into the mainstream and then allow the collective to benefit from the wisdom of the individual. So I'm hoping that what we're building can facilitate that somewhat. I completely share your general interest in frameworks for, input chaos, output order in this sort of epistemic sense. I think the better skeptics experiments are just awesome. And it's just an exciting kind of frontier. Like when the gap between the stated intentions of so many institutions is one thing, when the gap between the stated intentions and the actual products, the actual actions and revealed priorities are so different, this creates this huge market for de-bullshitification. And I think it's an exciting market to plunge into. I think there's going to be a lot of demand for this kind of thing, and it feels like a sandbox now, but I'm excited for how much pressure there's going to be escaping out the valves that experiments like you're doing release.
Yeah. No, if there's one thing I think that is emerging, and it seems you're sharing that sentiment too, is that I think people have to get a lot better at filtering their own sort of inputs and understanding the provenance of information, the process that drove that information, how much confidence they should have, and that might not be as easy for everybody, but like we can be doing a lot better. Like, everybody could be doing a lot better than we are right now, even with like just choosing who to trust.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think, and again, I just share that fundamental instinct you shared before, right? Like, there's just so much possibility out there, and we're just busy keeping ourselves down, like collectively, just like we're like what is it, the crabs that are pulling each other into the bucket or something like that. Like, there's just like this completely like counterproductive instinctive, like, well, what you're saying is not agreeing with like what the authorities are saying, therefore you're an idiot, or like whatever, which like, of course, like it's almost like like this prescriptivism in language, like what you said is not in the dictionary. It's like, but how did it get there in the first place? Like like somebody had to say something that wasn't in the dictionary for the dictionary to put it in there, right? Like, so somebody had to have an idea that the establishment would adopt for that to become the establishment idea. Like the persecuting ideas that are not the establishment is not even in the establishment's interest. Like it's just so suicidal. Like so self harming to approach these. Which makes it, as you say, like obvious that something is really broken in ways that are like really concerning. And yeah, I think the way you're describing it is the best way to. The most sort of optimistic way to take it, which is that it's opportunity, right? It's we can sit here and bitch and moan all day long, but like ultimately, there's a field of opportunity out there, and people should be jumping at it and getting better at it for themselves, and making ways for others to help others get better at it as well. Because we all again, like I just have this very like doomsday feeling, like unless we get much better at this fast, we're going to be in real trouble.
Yeah, I think that doomsday feeling is floating around for real. It's not just you. I mean, James, just yeah, no, you're not weird in that respect maybe. At all. Yeah, no. Yeah. I want to throw a little more light on something you said earlier that I really appreciated, which was, given that the motivated reasoning instincts and all these other social constructs, or at least drives, motivations, things like that, given that they aren't going away, we have to channel them into something that's productive and like use that as a force to go in the direction that we want to go in. I think that's awesome, and so few people are saying that. Like, there's a lot of emphasis on, well, just force yourself to not be motivated in your reasoning, and force yourself to follow rules that I conveniently set up for you, and things like that. And like, it's the epistemic version of denial of the sex drive, like in religious organizations. Like it's going to be there. You have to figure out how to make it work with the gestalt, work with the whole. And I think to the extent that we figure that out with knowledge processing and sense making, or whatever you call it, I think there's a really exciting vista there. And just the epistemic experiments of any kind is just the most interesting, high leverage thing, because what will it unlock? What knowledge do we already have that we're just sitting on uselessly? And once we figure this out, it's going to be like a printing press level transformation of society. It's going to be massive.
Yeah. Again, I sure hope it's for the best and not the guy in the lab in his basement. But let's just push that thought away.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, and that's the big terror. Of course, that's a possibility too. But then again, what else are we going to do?
Yeah, I mean, that's
the truth is going to set us free. Yeah,
and hopefully, alongside the guy in his basement that makes the next virus, is the guy in his basement that makes the next antibiotic, right? Like, or whatever. Like the
guy in his basement who cured cancer 100 years ago and had no means of telling anybody.
Sure. So that's the hope. But like, you're touching on something that I haven't really articulated, so I'm going to try now and see how it goes. But like, there's this idea of normality, and I was actually tracing when it entered the English language, or I think I saw somewhere a shocking revelation about that word, which is like it entered the word normal itself entered the English language about the 1850s. It's not like you would expect, like it would have been like forever, right? Like just like the most normal word, obviously. But actually, it comes from, and in the beginning, it was like a way to say like. It was almost like a technical term to say like you are average, or like not. It wasn't like a great thing to be normal. It was just like normal. But somehow like we say things like nobody's perfect, right? And I mean, we don't stop to think about what that means. But like, what does it mean to be perfect? Like that is not just like hard to do. It's undefined. Like, what is a perfect human?
Yeah.
Like, what age does a perfect human have? What knowledge is what does the perfect human do when they wake up in the morning? Like, do they go to the bathroom? Do they not? Like, like what's the? It's you can be better than yourself yesterday or than somebody else, right? But the potential is infinity. Like, perfection implies that there's like a something X that you should reach and like stay at, which is much more like a mechanistic thinking. It's like a machine that works really well than a systemic thinking of like, infinity, right? Again, it's like that's zero sum versus positive sum and really infinite sum games that we could be playing. But somehow we've just convinced ourselves that, there's that weird sense of regularity that all things should fall into and celebrated, and like have 1.5 children and like whatever, which just doesn't. Yeah, it's like us. Like that's the direction of my thought that I haven't really gone deep into a lot of it because it's depressing. But we keep like it's so common for us to talk about what's normal and what's perfect. I'm not perfect and I got my flaws, but they're not flaws. This is who you are, right? What you can do is channel them or not, right? You can embrace them or you can fight yourself, like be my guest. It's not going to work, right? Like the aggression is aggression. It's not good. It's not bad. If you are exposing it at a time of war, it is heroism. If you're expressing it at with your family, you're an idiot. But like the aggression itself is an object that is there. It doesn't have itself moral value. It's about where you challenge, and then as you said with the ecclesiastical matters, if you repress it, it'll show up at the worst possible place that you really don't want to see it, right? But that's it's hydraulic in nature. Like it does not compress. It's the pressure you push it from one side and it emerges on the other. Like, and again, you can use that to your advantage or not. Like you can understand that that's how it works or not. So to me, like I'm starting to push back on that very notion of normality, perfection, objectivity. These are just bad ideas themselves. Like not like unreachable or whatever. No, they're undefined. Like you literally can't tell me what a perfect human looks like. Like we allude to it, but we never actually concretely think about it. And I think that's part of the psyop, right? We feel always like less than and under less capable than we could be and whatever. And it's like this was never there. It's a complete illusion that we've been like convinced that like every time you have a bad thought or whatever, like that's just you. That's just you. Like a lot of times you just have to go through that, then try to avoid it, like try to go around it. Like that almost never works, at least not for me. I know others are much more disciplined than I am, but like I don't try to like willpower things. Again, like I try to set up feedback loops that take my ego and my and my ambition and steer them towards doing what I want to do. I don't like try to deny those things. And again, I think it's a fool's errand. It's not like I'm not like particularly clever for doing it. I don't have a choice to do it differently. So yeah, I think there's something really, really broken there with our even talking about normalization, what's normal, whatever. Like we are hunter-gatherers at heart. That's what we've been built for. Uncertainty. We're built for the wild. We've managed to domesticate ourselves in interesting ways, which is neither here nor there. And honestly, I think we got to reclaim some of that. Maybe not everything, but like some of that wild instinct, I think, has to be channeled back, or it goes into places you don't want it to go.
100%. I'm becoming a little bit of a conspiracy theorist about metaphors for this exact reason, that all of these are just so bad and so counter, reality, that it's fascinating. They seem perfectly engineered to take the agency and all like the essential qualities out of humanity in a certain respect. I have been attracted to the word skillfulness to kind of fill in a lot of these gaps. There's kind of a non-judgmental aspect to that. And it's also kind of with relationship to a goal or a circumstance. Like aggression in war is heroism. That's skillful. Aggression at your dinner table is idiotic. That's unskillful. It does not achieve the goals of, a healthy family dynamic and stuff like that. But yeah, this is one of my overarching, fascinations with just, there's so much leverage in this. Just the tiny tweaks in the metaphors that we bake into society, again, just unlock torrents of order, of reasonableness that takes no effort once this switch is made. So I love this. I love when people point these kind of things out, and love to continue talking about it more sometime. But I want to let you go at the end of our time here. I really appreciate you spending all this time with us. It's been a blast. And
thanks a lot.
We're going to continue to follow everything you do on Twitter. So thanks so much, man.
Thanks very much.
I'm sorry about that.
No.
Some of it is
sorry about what?
Nobody should have to go through. But it's fun in its own weird way.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, there's a bit of a gladiatorial element of it, and it's fun. And I absolutely am ready to take you up on the UFO investigation offer for Better Skeptics. If that's of interest, yeah, by all means, let's have some fun.